Yeah, I got a comment today. Intake manifolds, and I'm fired up. Well, a little bit, because intakes are my jams. And so we'll go over the comments that were made. But today we're going to talk about a couple things. We're talking about intake manifolds, single planes, and dual planes, and really why we don't see a port injected dual plane intake manifold for small block Chevy, big block Chevy, small block Ford, big block Ford, Dodge, whatever. And here's the reasoning for this. Here's the reasoning why the world needs this. If we take a look at a comparison, any comparison, I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I've been doing this 30 years or more now. And not just been a car guy for 30 years. I've been doing direct back-to-back dyno testing. So I've been doing testing where we answer questions specifically like this. Because lots of guys will say, oh, I've been doing this forever. Yeah, but you've been going on a chassis dyno and tuning cars. We're not the same. We're not the same people. So if we in all this testing that I do, when you can look up all the videos I have up, a single plane, dual plane, the results are always the same. Where the crossover point is shifts a little bit. And in some cases, the dual plane does better than the single plane everywhere, like we tested on a 4.8 liter. And that's not just single plane, dual plane. That's those two things. So that single plane and that dual plane, which the ones I tested were both Edelbrocks. But we see a similar thing with the Holley versions on an LS. So if you run a 4.8 liter, put the dual plane RPM on there, then put the Victor Jr. on there, the RPM is better. It's a much better choice. It's got a ton more low speed torque. And the single plane doesn't really pass it. And if it does, it's just like way at the top of the RPM range and it's beyond where most people would run. And on small block Chevys or big block Chevys, small block Fords, Dodges, whatever, big blocks, a similar thing happens. When we run a dual plane, it makes more power up to some point, and then the single plane at down low and in the middle, and then the single plane makes more power beyond that. So wherever that crossover point is, has a lot to do with what the combination is, how big it is, what the manifold was originally designed for. Let's say that they cross over at 5,000 RPM, that below 5,000, the dual plane does better. Above that, the single plane. Sometimes the crossover is much higher than that. Sometimes it's 6,000, or like the case in the 4.8, it's 6,500 or something. Sometimes it's lower than that. Maybe it's 4,500 or somewhere in there. But somewhere there, that's what usually happens. There's a crossover point. Single planes, by design, are not good at low speed power production. We can adjust that a little bit by changing things in that design while retaining the basic overall design. We can make the ports smaller, and there are things that we can do to do that. But basically, that's what happens. Single planes are not low RPM manifolds. Okay, dual planes are. And dual planes are not just low RPM manifolds, as we've seen with like RPM air gaps and stuff, which are excellent manifolds. They're really good low and mid and high RPM deals. If by high you mean 6,500 or something like that. So that works really well. So enter in, and this has been the way it has been since the dawn of time. If you look at all the OEM stuff back when it was carbureted, they're dual planes because they have a good overall power range. It's much better, much easier to get the tune right on the carburetor. It provides more low speed power, which is where most people want stuff. And the dual plane just excels at like that low speed power production. They're just really, really good at that. So fast forward a few years, we start ushering in the age of fuel injection and stuff. And we have all new manifolds where we're just flowing air. And then, we have the injectors down at the ports. We also had throttle body stuff, but where we have port injection, that's a different thing. But now, while this was happening, a lot of the aftermarket guys, Edelbrock and Holley and these guys, what they did was, okay, we're going to make port fuel injected versions of these manifolds. So guys that are normally carbureted guys, they could put these 4-hole throttle bodies on there, run it port injected. They could also, and then after that, they kind of came up with these 4-hole throttle bodies. They could run those on there. And both of those work. I've tested lots of those. We've tested, and the best test I think that I did, and this is the one that we're going to talk about. That's where we ran a single plane intake manifold that was set up for port fuel injection. And I ran it with a carburetor. We ran it with port fuel injection as a batch fire. and then as a sequential, and then as a sequential with individual cylinder tuning, because we wanted to find out, what is the power difference there between those things. And as we've seen through most of the carburetor versus EFI testing, when we run a carburetor on a manifold, especially these single planes were designed for carburetors originally. When we run a carburetor on there, it tends to make a little more power. And doesn't change it dramatically usually, but it tends to make a little bit more power from charge cooling. That's pretty normal. And you could try to make an argument that the single plane with port injection is only flowing air, and then so it could flow more and make more power, but that didn't happen. It hasn't ever happened in the testing that I've done. And the reason for that is at port fuel injection, you're still spraying the fuel into the port of the head, to the head port. So you're still displacing that airflow. So even if you got extra airflow from the intake manifold, it's still being lessened, let's say, by having the fuel, dropped into the cylinder head. On direct injection, that changes. In direct injection, we're injecting it just into the cylinder. All you're doing is flowing air. And so that setup could flow more, has more airflow potential, and therefore additional power potential if everything, the sizes and everything remain the same. So if you did direct injection, that's one thing. Port injection, I haven't seen where that's been beneficial. Even when we went to great lengths of sequential ejection and individual cylinder tuning, we could get the individual cylinders all making the right air fuel, which could certainly save the motor, but not from a power standpoint. It didn't really do very much. So I'm going to read this. I'm going to read this email to you, and it's important to me because I don't like there to be misinformation out there, and this is what people have to deal with occasionally. So it's this guy had sent me. Had watched a lot of the videos, and he's talking about a small block Ford application, and he was asking. I guess he had contacted Edelbrock to ask them about a dual plane EFI, like a port injected dual plane manifold, because he likes the way dual planes work. He wants to run it fuel injected. He wants a port injected dual plane, like I think everybody should make. But this was the response that he got. He said after following, he was talking to me first. He said, after following you for a few years, dual planes make more power and torque below 5,000 almost all the time. Yeah, and it could be, like I said, the crossover could be at different spots. He said, but the engineer from Edelbrock tends to disagree with you. And so he shared this with me, and the response that he got from Edelbrock was, his name is Ed. Ed, I hope you understand what I'm going to share here. I will agree a little with your comment when used with a carburetor. However, the Edelbrock direct port fuel injection, so port injection, the ProFlow 4 EFI system, you're only flowing air through the intake manifold, which is true. We have dyno tested and driven many miles with these in our R&D department for many years, and we have even used these single plane intake EFI manifolds on stock 289s and 302s. His is a small block Ford application in the late 60s Mustangs with no issue with low end throttle response and torque. Even on small block Chevys, 283s and 307s. As for Edelbrock ever placing injector bungs in a dual plane intake manifold, I've worked here 30 years and will never see this style come from us. Our extensive testing proves otherwise. So I'm not going to look at this like as an adversarial thing, because it'd be like somebody arguing with me that the earth is flat. I would rather teach it as a learning experience. I would like to address this like as a learning experience, certainly from him to him and to the other people that may have got this kind of information. Because here's something that we know is true, and I know it's true from my extensive direct back-to-back dyno testing, and the test not recently, within the last couple of years, where we did the single plane with port injection and sequential and all that stuff. And when I did that test, the one thing that it didn't do is change the design of the intake manifold. I don't think anybody would disagree. Certainly not anybody from Edelbrock. I know the guys there and their R&D. I know their intake guys. They're really sharp guys. I've spoken to them a lot, and they're way smarter than I am. But they would have to agree that there's a difference between a single plane intake and a dual plane intake manifold. So I don't think anybody disagrees with that. So if we know that going in, that a dual plane does one thing and a single plane does the other thing, now the question becomes, how does port injection fundamentally change the design of the intake manifold? And the answer is that it doesn't. There's no way that it can. It doesn't matter where you put the fuel in. We've seen minor changes in power from, like I talked about, if we put the carburetor on there, it actually makes more power than port injection. So every time I've tested that, it's done that. So we know that the port injection is not adding low speed power like it does in a comparison between a single plane and a dual plane. That just doesn't happen. And I know that that doesn't happen because I've tested it many, many times. So what I would like to see, and if I don't know who the Edelbrock engineer is, I would love to come look at your data if you have any. And my suspicion is that they don't have any data where they have run a single plane and a dual plane carbureted, and then ran a single plane and a dual plane with a port injection setup to see if there's any difference, because I know that there's not going to be. The single plane is going to do one thing and the dual plane is going to do another thing, and they will do that regardless of how you administer the fuel to them. There may be a difference between port injection and like a throttle body injection on top or a carburetor on top with each individual manifold, but it's not going to fundamentally change the design of the intake manifold. It can't do that. What I'm hoping is that it's somebody saying this because that's what they make and because that's what they're trying to market and that's what they're trying to push. But that's not good information for them to tell a customer that, yeah, that making this thing a port injection. And I've modified many of their Victor Jr. manifolds for big blocks and stuff before they offered them. We've seen that done a lot. And I've tested them at Westech. And so we know what they do. I've run, in fact, I have their, it's a single plane, big block Chevy. It's probably modeled after a 454R. I don't know, or 454O, because I think ours is an oval port one. But it's set up with port injection on it. And we did that so that, because I'm running boost on it, not because I wanted more low speed power, actually because I wanted less. We knew what the single plane would do. We don't want more low speed torque. If I did that, I would put a dual plane on. In fact, this motor should have a dual plane on. It would run much better with the cam and the heads and stuff that we have on it. It would be a better combination with their RPM air gap, maybe with a carb spacer or something on there. It would run much better with that combination, given our RPM range. But I know what it does. Like I said, then that's not the only, I've tested lots of them on Fords and Chevys and Dodges and all kinds of stuff. So we know what they do. But my question is, or my advice is I'm happy to anybody at Edelbrock, if you guys are listening, if you want to come over to the dyno and we can do that test together, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to come to your place if you guys still have a facility that has dynos available and you can demonstrate to me how port injection with no other change, not timing, not air fuel, not anything else, how port injection somehow fundamentally changes the design of the intake manifold. I would be more than happy to see that. Just in the 30 years that I've been doing this direct back-to-back dyno testing, and a lot of times of exactly that, it has never shown me that. So until somebody shows me that that you can make the low speed power with a single plane that you can with a dual plane, I don't think that that's possible. And therefore, that's why I think the industry needs port injected dual planes, because then it would be a better combination for the vast majority of the things, because way more people are building combinations that utilize dual planes. I bet if you looked at the dual plane sales versus the single plane sales, I bet it would be way more dual planes, because more people build those kinds of 6,500 and lower RPM combinations. I'm certain of it. I mean, based on the truck cam sales and all those things, I'm sure low speed power, and I use low speed as a term, just like long runner and short runner. Low speed power is 6,500 and less. So for that kind of RPM range, it's really hard to beat a dual plane. And that's why I think that there should be port injected dual plane manifolds, because they're going to perform the exact same way. And the funny thing is, I had a similar conversation, and this makes me worried about the results, but I had a similar conversation with the guys from Holley, that they said, no, we're not going to make I said, you need to make a port injected dual plane. No, that doesn't work. Single planes are the only way to go. I'm like, okay, all the other things I told you about cross rams, and when we talked tunnel rams and all these other things that I talked about that you guys eventually did, and and all work. I said, so you're not thinking that that's going to work? So now I'm figuring I guess I have to do it and show the world maybe. Tim, what's going on? That guy, Jerry, 30 years. I need to settle for another intake manifold since Trick Pro let me down. Oh, is this the box intake manifold? Dual plane port EFI would have dramatically different airflow per cylinder. There's only 1% of the tuners that would tune per cylinder. Well, I would argue that how does the carburetor know to tune itself to each cylinder? Because the cylinder filling from in a dual plane from all the runners is dramatically different. The signal that it gets is dramatically different. And I know that the air fuel, even on a carbureted combination, is way different. The air fuel distribution's definitely off, not because I have a carburetor, but because of the intake manifold. I would argue that with port injection, particularly with individual cylinder tuning, you could make it have the right air fuel through the whole thing. Love my dual plane. I think that people are missing the boat on that. A few months back, eBay had a ton of China intakes for the 351 for sale. Hope they seal up. The earth is flat. Okay. Time to go drill some ports in a dual plane, make the exact same power as a carb intake manifold. I know, and I had this conversation. Who was with? I think Chad was with me maybe at the time when we were talking about all this. Doesn't Hughes make a port injection EFI dual plane for the 318 and 360? I don't know, dude. They may. They should. If they don't, they definitely should. Can or has anyone made a direct port injection from a regular intake manifold? You can't make direct port injection because the intake manifold has nothing to do with that. Direct port injection has to go into the head, into the combustion chamber. That's usually accessed through the cylinder head. The intake manifold is just along for the ride at that point. Down here in Central Florida, hopefully you guys are safe. Trying to reason with hurricane season, I bet. And good rhyme there. You get extra points for the rhymage. If you think port injected manifold is a dry flow intake manifold, you have to be kidding yourself. Yeah, it's still spraying in the bottom of the manifold. How about a tunnel ram? If you have room, is it the best? Yes, I have comparisons up between single plane and dual plane and tunnel ram, and the tunnel ram always wins. The tunnel ram doesn't make as much low speed power as the dual plane does, but it makes more power in the middle, at least the testing that I've done, in the middle and at top compared to both of them. Doing hurricane cleanup. I'm glad you're safe, though. Pontiac V8 would be a good test, as always, right? That goes for anything. With you 100%, I want one of those GM LSX dual planes that have injection ports. I've been looking for one since they discontinued, or a big block Chevy port injected dual plane. Good street strip intake manifolds. I agree. And Edelbrock already has the perfect dual plane. I mean, their RPM air gap, that's really the go-to dual plane intake manifold. I don't know why they wouldn't do port injection on it. If they did, they wouldn't sell any more TBI units. I don't think that that's the case. I think a TBI, because of charge cooling, could probably make more power than the port injected stuff. And I think ultimately a TBI would be less expensive than a port injected deal too. But it's been almost a year. Grapeseed. So been almost a year since you caught a live stream. I'm going to do another one tonight. Most engines with less than 8 cylinders that are EFI have long and short runners and a valve that selects the runner based on RPM. A valve that selects the runner? I've never seen that. What are your plans for the Slant 6? I plan to put it back together and run it on the dyno. Chad, not Chad, but the other Chad. Yeah, the Chad. If you're using port injection, I'm assuming other intakes that are better than a dual plane that's designed to operate around a carb, but dual planes do look cool? I actually haven't. I don't on the LS anyway. The dual plane down low performs very well. In fact, better than a truck manifold does. So down low, you could do pretty well, I think, with the dual plane. It's not hard to drill out injector ports. I've done it. Yeah, it's not. That's not insurmountable. Tim's in the house. Scott's in the house. You think TBI with atomization of fuel injection and flow of a carb-like way, it would be the king. The atomization from a throttle body injection, they have problem duplicating what a carburetor does. I have a Performer dual plane that I ported for EFI, but didn't fit my head, so it sits in the corner. I should just get a small block Chevy and run it. So, Bill, you've already done one that you have port injection on? Finding a lean miss and would settle for just finding it. Scott here, you want me to restart from the beginning, long hair? An injector with a long nozzle would be about as close to direct injection as possible. But it's not, though, because it's not just spraying it in there. You're still displacing airflow, and also direct injection is happening at a different piston position. Let's see. I'm rolling. Only a small number of Brodix 410 sprint car heads are direct port injection. Yeah, that's that's alcohol, right? That they run those on alcohol. Amazing content. Should I upgrade my rocker arms to BTR LS3 rocker arms with trunnions, or stay with my stock rocker arms and just upgrade trunnions? Planning on boosting my LS3. It depends on a number of things. One, how high do you want to rev it? And then how many miles does your thing have on it? I'd like to see a port fuel injection test that tested the ohm of each injector, flow rates on each, and the difference per port AFR when running to see what the different said intakes have. Why do you the injector is going to spray the same as long as you flow test the injectors and they all flow the same. The amount of flow variance is not going to come from the injector. The reason that you see disparity, or the biggest part of the disparity that you would see in air fuel ratio for individual cylinders, is because of the intake design. So a single plane intake manifold is not going to be anywhere, or a dual plane is not going to be anywhere near the same on all the runners. That's something that they do when they design direct like EFI intake manifolds designed for port injection, and they're not flowing the fuel through it. They can make this torturous path, and if they have enough packaging space, they can make all the runners the same. They can make them all the same size, the same length, the same taper, so that they all and make the head all the same, so that all the cylinders, when they're supplying the same amount of fuel, that they get an optimized amount of fuel. That's not possible with a single plane intake manifold or a dual plane intake manifold. You have to adjust. You have to adjust the amount of fuel because there's a difference in cylinder filling because of the intake design. I think he means dual path runners per cylinder. Yeah, if you have long runner and short runner intake manifolds, which OEMs do, like the Fords had Emmerich plates and Porsches had variable runners, the GSR had variable runners, all of that stuff's possible. Brodix 2200 series are direct port injection. Where they have a valve to divert short runners. Oh, yeah. I thought you were talking about some sort of cylinder selection thing. But yeah, long runner, short runner, that's pretty common. The old Taurus SHO, that's a good example. Yep. Ford did a lot of those. The modular Ford was like that. LS3 and TBS intakes are the best in usable mid-range power because of the long runners, which is similar to a dual plane. Yeah, those don't actually make the low-speed power that a dual plane does. Telling you, Rich, we need an intake with two plenums that feed crossover on the middle two cylinders of each bank, but the same side on the front and rear. Do the same pattern as a dual plane. We did something like that when I did the adjustable fast manifold. We made the outers long and the inner short. and it just made less power than than it did with all of them long. I think the Ford 190 horsepower 3.8. Yeah, doing RPM trickery is a good way for guys to get like, and even on the they didn't do runner length change, but on the PI version of the truck 4.6 2-valve motors, they had a divider for change in plenum volume, which bolstered torque down at I think it was 2,500 or something, and didn't do anything else anywhere else because the plenum volume didn't have a dramatic change except right there, and that's what they were trying to do. But it worked pretty well in that application. Just picked up an Edelbrock multi-port setup for a small block Chevy. Got it in trade. Maybe I'll use it. That's cool. Douglas, you got a 5.3. It's your first time. Would you suggest a Terminator X Max on a stock intake or a different port injection manifold for low end power? You're not going to get better than the stock intake manifold for low speed and mid range torque. You won't get any better than that. Would you consider swapping out a GT40 tubular and ported lightning lower on a 351 setup for a dual plane and elbow setup? I would be almost 100% certain that an RPM air gap will make more power than your GT40 will on a 5.7 or a 5.8 351. Unless you have a race car, you're not living at 7,000. Surely with all the companies out there, some guy had the idea to try ported dual plane, but it probably wasn't stable enough to sell the average hot rodder. The only one that I've ever seen, the guys from Speedmaster had one. Unfortunately, the manifold, the way that it was machined, it wouldn't go on our cylinder head combination that we had on our big block to test. But they actually, and they may still have one available that we could try. I know GM went from one extreme to another with TPI to super short LT1s. I wonder why they didn't shoot for middle ground after learning TPI lessons. I don't know. I think that they kind of did that with the LS. Richard, have you ever messed with one of the eBay Speedmaster ITB downdrafts on a small block Chevy? Yeah, I have videos up on that. I would suggest a Holley ECU to anyone for the ease of installation. Direct injections, the cat's pajamas, the bee's knees. Very common to have variable length runners on Japanese, German, and Korean vehicles. How much of a detriment do you think it would be putting 241 heads on a 4.8? I have a short block that needs heads, and I can't get the heads for real cheap. They'll be fine. They're not, the chamber's not much bigger than a, and you could even mill them if you want to get the chamber size down. They flow pretty well. In fact, they flow, I think, a little better than the 5.3 or 4.8 heads do. And they should be, if you mill them, they should have the same combustion chamber size and the same static compression. What's the best flowing factory head of what engine family? No updates on the big block. Scott, you're already doing shots. BNR. Okay, so you can inject gas into it too. Okay. Yeah, that would make sense. Got a Gen 4 5.3 flat top 799s, milled 30. Stage 4 Summit cam. I don't know if you'll have enough piston valve clearance because I never tried that in that combination. The camshaft that we ran in the 5.3 that I have that's like that is the BTR Stage 4 LS3 camshaft. Greg, thanks for help yesterday with the broken valve issue. You guys are correct. So what happened? What turned out to be the deal? Scott, I'm always up for that. 99 more to go. There's 115 people here, man. That's a lot of shots. Todd's in. Mixing and drinking. Uh-oh. Dryer's out. Oh, it's an AI Wi-Fi equipped one. That's such nonsense. Philip, do you want to know if LS is sequential or batch? And the test that I did, we ran it both ways. Then you have a truck Norris cam with an LSA supercharger. Okay, you could do that. Or if you wanted one for 179, you could get one of my cams. That's right. Shameless plug. I have a 91 Toyota MR2. I like those. I had an 86 or an 87. A lot of people, Honda K Series swap, are they using 3S GTE turbo engines out of a Toyota Caldina? I've never heard of that. Is that somewhere other than in the United States? And I know nothing about that engine, so I would tend to doubt that does it make as much power NA as a K Series does? Think about picking up a show for my girlfriend to drive. I've been working with Indian tech support for 20 years. Yeah, BNR, that's correct. The TunePort stuff, which I think is their best looking intake manifold, factory intake manifold. Although the Rochester fuel injection is pretty cool. And I like the later one. I like the 327 board better than I like the 283 one. But those all had to fit under the hood of a Corvette, which is fairly low, and a Camaro. If you're running factory fuel rails, LS fuel rails can get you cylinder to cylinder distribution. Why do you think a fuel rail would do that? Any suggested readings for tuning for drivability on a Gen 5 LT with HP tuners? HP Academy or whatever, the High Performance Academy maybe that has stuff. New Zealand has a lot of guys getting way more power of an MR2 can handle out of a 3S. Okay, yeah, I'm not at all familiar. I'll have to look up. I don't know what that engine family is. Richard, yesterday I was offered a 69 396 SHP assembly plant. So tell me what you're trying to say after 396. I would suggest Holly ECU to everyone. Yeah, they work good. Although this new Haltech is supposed to work good too. I'm not talking long and short runners, but a crossover on the center cylinder so each side of the intake sees even pulses. No dual planes crossover. I did that when I did my adjustable intake manifolds on the Ford. I don't know if we did. I tried that on the Honda too. I actually tried that on a 4-cylinder where I had dual plenums. We tried them divided and then connected. So I have done that testing already. You're just joining the plenums, and then if you have what I wanted to do, what we did do is put a throttle body in the middle of those so that we could open and close it to connect them or not connect them, and it does make a difference. But you're not evening out the pulses. That's not what's happening. You're changing the resonance frequency of the entire system by making it bigger or smaller depending on which direction you're going. Scrolling back. Bathurst is cool. I'm going to send you a text with a pic for a built 460, no miles, Victor intake, also cheap. Okay. Never seen it. Check it out. Oh yeah, the Bathurst stuff is cool. That's an impressive like racetrack. RPM air gap is the best dual plane intake manifold. Yeah. Shameless plugs are good. Good. What would be your go-to EFI dual plane intake manifold for a 351? There isn't one. That's my point. That's what we're talking about. Holly does a dual plane intake manifold for an LS that has injector bosses there, but it's not machined to take the injectors. Okay, so they made it when they cast it for the ability to have injectors. They just never machined them out. Scott, you got to have priorities, right? Are you planning on doing any LSA supercharger experimentation? I think that's pretty well been covered, but I don't have any to do testing with. Heads up, I've got an M122 and you're running it with a carburetor. That'll work. Man, why does it jump down so far? Richard, the valve seats have sunk into the head, causing the valve height to be too tall. This made the rockers push the valves in a sideways motion, causing the failures. Okay. Richard, have you ever tested a dual plane with a beveled edge? Are you talking about, what are you talking about? Where is this beveled edge? Is it the one in the divider? As a kid, we had a color TV. That's nice. 3 SGE and the Celica makes 170. The beams versions that you would get in MR2. What is a beam version? HP tuner's course should be nice. You can run 16 injectors instead of adding fuel injector driver plus its flex fuel. So I guess we'll see. Customer brought me the strangest small block I've ever seen for a build. 64cc heads, 20216, flat top, 0 deck, 4-inch bore. Do you think that that's weird because it's at 0 deck? Because the 64cc chamber is totally normal, 20216 totally normal, 4-inch bore totally normal. Is it because it's a 0 deck thing? Maybe they just got that one. That one just got lucky. I'd like to see a test where you boost a 350 small block with Vortec heads. Curious what type of horsepower and torque those stock Vortec heads would make. Stock Vortec heads on a 406. Well, they would do exactly what the boost multiplier suggests they do. So if we run a small block Chevy with stock Vortec heads, and let's say that it made 350 horsepower, if we run 15 pounds of boost, it's going to be at 700. And that's what they'll do. It doesn't matter that that head is specific. It just matters what the NA power output was to start with. So if we had one with stock Vortec heads that somehow made 400 horsepower, then it would make 800 at 15 pounds. 1970 LT1 is a 4-inch bore. So there's lots of 327s that are 4-inch bores and 302s that are 4-inch bores. The dual plane is designed for nitrous ports and not EFI. Okay. Angry operator, I'm happy to help. 396T was the assembly plant. Oh, so is it actually a big block and not some sort of stroker LS then? The fuel injection versus carb test where the carb made more power was the fuel injection TBI style. No, I didn't run TBI. I only ran on that test. I only ran port injection. 1970 LT1 had 11-1. Yeah, it had small domes. The later ones were less compression. They were 9-1, right? 396 2-bolt, 375 horse. Was a 375 horse 396 a 2-bolt? I thought that those were 4-bolt blocks. And Todd, find out what they want for it. Thanks for advice on the 241 heads I mentioned earlier. Just messaged the guy in Marketplace. Always appreciate the live feed. I have a 71 LT1 and a 73 Vet. Is 15 psi of oil pressure at idle up to 40 cold, safe for a turbocharger application? 15 seems low, but maybe you're not getting an accurate reading. I always like putting a mechanical gauge on them to see what the real number is. And if then it's that low, you might think about doing something. Did 60s engines actually have the compression ratio? Yeah, you'd have to measure everything out and see how much variation they had, primarily in what was actually where were the pistons? Were they down in the hole? Were they above the hole? Were they at zero deck? How big were the domes in those, and what was the actual chamber size? You'd have to math that out, but they were pretty close. Todd, just send me an email about it. Would a large spacer with a divider to match up with a dual plane get close to the averages of both the tunnel ram and the dual plane? No spacer on a dual plane is going to do anything that's going to make it be like a single plane. An open spacer will help the thing make a little more peak power. It will help a dual plane make a little more peak power, but it loses power down low if you do that too. It just shifts the curve. Todd, I don't know. Send me an email about what you're talking about. Any new information on the blueprint motor? I don't know that that's even a thing anymore. Has anybody bought a GM27 Turbo Max 4-cylinder? The heads aren't double humps. Has no oil fill baffle, so I figure it was a 350. Haven't got into the bottom end yet, but I'm thinking it'll be fun. Can you look at the block and see the block casting number? You could look on the back of it and see it should tell you at least what the block was. It might tell you whether it's a 302 or a 327 or a 350. Are you looking at getting into the LT world? I don't know, maybe. The problem is I got to run some sort of factory computer to do that, and it's just way too time consuming. So spacers make torque. Open spacers on a dual plane make power at the top, and wherever your definition of top is, usually it just rocks the curve somewhere, and so it makes less down low and more at the top. Wherever that transition thing is, this could be your definition of that. Richard needs a 632 to play with. Got an older 327. Was thinking about doing a top end. What would you suggest? I'm about to run some trick float heads on a small block 400. What's your opinion on an On3 7675? I've never tested any of the On3 stuff, but I would imagine that they get their stuff from the same place that other people do. So, I can't say anything positive or negative because I never tested it, but I think it's probably good. Games, you're going to put an LS top end on your small block? Also on Trig, be on L8T. The guys at BTR just did a bunch of L8T testing. My buddy just scored a GMC with a 4.3 liter. Is there a TBI or TPI system on it? And should it be upgraded for twin? Yeah, you should put turbos on it, is the answer. Yeah. LT or 58X and 4X gear could stay with port injection on LT. Be good data swaps. But the problem is that market is not a port injected market. They would want direct injected results, and rightfully so. Me just doing a bunch of port injected things is not going to really help much, I don't think. I'm looking to purchase a 4-barrel 4.3 intake manifold. Would you have one? I don't. I have one, but I don't have one for sale. BG, you're building a 5.3. What's the horsepower limit for 91 on what? What are you putting it in? What's the motor and all that? I would go VS or even eBay over an On3. Oh, Tim's saying he had problems with it. 4.3 liter V6 was TBI. They had throttle body injected stuff, but then they also had that spider injection, the CFI stuff. LC9 7875. A 7875 is a good turbo for lots of guys have used it. It's a good turbo for LS stuff. Yeah, there's no horsepower limit for 91. The horsepower limit for 91 is a function of all of the other stuff that you do. Is it a big motor? Is it a low compression motor? Is it what size turbos does it have? Does it have softened chamber? There's all kinds of things that come into that. It would be nice if life was like, okay, you can make 603 horsepower on 91. That's it. Can't do any more than that. Life's not like that though. Any more than how much boost can I run without ring gap? 9.7 pounds. I don't know. I don't know what that number is. Tristan, I've been talking to tuners and engine builders down here in Arkansas who like BTR, and I told them I'm wanting a truck Norris cam to be installed and won't accept my truck to do. They don't want to install a truck Norris cam? Have they not installed cams before or something? Like, what's the issue? They like everything else but the truck Norris? Are they having problems tuning it? Have them talk to James Short. He can tune it just fine. Tim, sign me up for a 585 rear wheel horsepower, Richard, and we'll call it quits on the Fox. I don't know what you're talking about. That's how much power you want to make? And how am I involved in that? I do a lot of port injection upgrades to the LT using micro squirt. So port injection is doing the heavy lifting. Yeah, they've done that at BTR. In fact, I think that they did that on that L8T. They ran both, probably maxing out the direct injection and then supplementing it with port injection. And they did over 2,000 with that motor. And I think that they did that. I can't swear to that. I'm thinking that that's what they did. Maybe they did all port injection. I don't know. But that's been going on for a long time. And obviously that works. But only doing port injection would be problematic. Would a sniper fuel injection system and computer overtake the computer system that our truck already has? They're not going to merge together and work together, if that's what you're asking. They're saying it messes with the sort of compression and it's not worth it. I was very confused, even though I have a 2800 stall. It messes with sort of compression. Yeah, I don't know what they're saying and what your translation of what they're saying is. I don't understand that. It's just a cam. We've run that cam hundreds of times, and BTR and their customers have run thousands of those, I'm sure. So it's not an issue. It works. The cam works really good. Are you surprised Trick Flow like Edelbrock doesn't produce an EFI dual plane intake manifold? I am surprised. That's what I was talking about here today. It changes dynamic compression. Every camshaft ever made changes dynamic compression from the stock motor. You might be able to find one that duplicates it, but pretty much anytime you're changing power, you're going to change the dynamic compression, and they all do that. So that's not a reason that you can't tune it. Like I said, If they don't want to do it, then talk to James. He'll do it. Recommend heads, trick flow, or AFR 185 heads for a 351. Excuse me, cam to match for the best street truck application for 400 horsepower. Is that even reasonable for a street? Yeah, an RPM air gap and airflow research 185s or the trick flow 11Rs. There's no bad choice there. They're both really good. And then some kind of cam like that 274 cam that I recommend to everybody. Trick flow has a version of that. I think it's their stage 2 cam. If you have a hydraulic roller 351, then all of that will be more than 400 horsepower. I know I need a different engine builder. Yeah, I don't see what they're hesitant. That what probably has happened with them is they've had trouble tuning either the idle or drivability or transition or something, because maybe they didn't understand their tuning thing the way that they need to. And so they then say, well, that cam is not tunable. I've had people say that about other things. That's not, cam isn't tunable. I'm like, yeah, but you're saying that about the one time or maybe 2 times that you've tried it. And yet here's all these other people out in the world that are doing it. So what's happening is they know something, some keystroke or whatever, that you don't know. And that's the only situation. Now, I would look at that if I was in their shoes. I would look at that as an opportunity to learn that and go, okay, well, because it's not just going to work with a Truck Norris cam. Whatever the thing is that they're going to learn may work for a lot of different things. Because if you have a cam that has low idle vacuum or something, I don't think the Truck Norris cam necessarily has that. But if you have a cam that, you know, and you put one in and it surges or whatever you learn from this experience can help you solve that problem. I'm doing an MSD ignition controller, dual plane, 5.3 Truck Norris. Okay. I've got a dual plane air gap sold by Hughes Engines, made by Edelbrock for a Dodge Magnum. So is it a port injected one? Because the guy in the email said that he said that Edelbrock won't be doing that. He said that we won't be doing that here. And it seemed odd. My tuner says the BTR 200 is too big to tune for drivability. A BTR 200 what? A BTR 220. Is it an LT cam or something? But said they could have tuned a GPI stage 1. Okay. LT501 engine ran both injections, so factory GM ECU can do it. What do you mean by both injections? As the later 01 you're talking about, right? Not the 400 horsepower one from the late 80s or 90s, right? You're talking about the supercharged one? Hughes Engine sells them. I've got it on a 408 stroker. Yeah, see, I didn't know about the Dodge version of that, but if they do a Dodge one, why wouldn't they do a Ford or a Chevy one? In a 6.2 LT? Okay. Again, I would talk to James Short. He's pretty good to that stuff. The LT5 had both direct. Yeah, it had port injection and direct injection. I think probably to clean the valves, but it obviously made power too. Big crazy power. 2 more minutes. We never had a poll. Here, our poll will be very, very quick. Should the aftermarket make port EFI dual plane intakes? Yes. Yes, they should, is your answer. Just so you guys know. .360 Magnum, Edelbrock, do it yourself. Dual plane DIY. Interesting. Really? Only 93%? Come on, guys. Who do I need to get in touch with for a tune when I swap my cam? I would go to the guys at Short Tuning. James Short. Your pole saw needs to be repaired. I've been wondering about the Holley 4-barrel throttle body. Should you run a spacer to make a common plenum? Is that more for carburetors? What are you running it on? Are you running it on a dual plane intake manifold? Eric, I will be back tonight. Tim, you're going to get the no-name intake manifold? People who answer no are going to complain about plugs not being sleek and sexy. How hard is it to just drill and weld bungs on any of the dual planes? It's not hard at all. Sometimes because of the way the rest of the intake manifold is, you're going to have to play with injector angle and height and stuff, but it's not, none of it is insurmountable. Dual plane EFI on my 408. Link, send me over a photo of that. What state is Short Tuning in? They are in Kentucky. Does it need to be a dual plane, or should it just be longer intakes like tune port? No, that works well too. That does something different. But the topic of discussion for tonight was single planes and dual planes. I need a cam recommendation for a 6.2 LS with a carb dual plane and a 2,500-pound car manual transmission. Well, if you tell me how much power you're trying to make, I could help you out. And please don't say as much as possible. Link, there's my email. All the powers. Yep. Much as possible. Do you want what a top fuel motor makes? No, I don't want that. I can't drive that. Well, then why are we having this conversation? All right, Stuart. We'll see you later, man. There. He has good cams and good prices with the shirts. I do have cams available. So if you're an LS guy and you're looking for a cam, I've got good cams. See, it's this one right here, and it's even squared. Energy equals turbo cam squared, because that's what happens to the power. It gets squared. It's not that. Imagine a top fuel power truck. You could easily burn him down. Just sit there. I think he would run out of fuel at a lot of these stoplights. I have a 351 Windsor with 448 IDA downdrafts. Nice. Have you ever jetted it where the transition jets are not the same? I haven't tried that. Every time I've done Weber's, I've made them all the same, hoping that they were supposed to be the same. But I don't ever remember running downdraft Weber's like on the engine dyno. I've only seen that on the chassis dyno. The stuff that we ran, lots of stack injection like that, but it was all fuel injection though. Street strip, mostly street, 500 horsepower. So out of a 6.2, that's easy. You would get that with either one of my cams. Is it power squared at 14.7? That would be a lot, right? Nah, it's just multiplied by 2. I just made the 2, so it had more value. Are the Pro LS cams for Summit as good as BTR cams, or will I get the same performance from a similar duration anyways on my LS1? Do you ship cams to Canada? I don't ship to Canada. Some of the guys have shipped to other places in the United States that do that. I need to just look into it and see what's involved. I just don't want to fill out any paperwork, basically. Is that the new t-shirt design? This t-shirt design is available from Teespring if you guys want to go get that. If you want to E equals boost cam squared. So you have to go to Teespring and that's available. But the cams that the shirts that I just got are the hashtag wrong cam ones. And the Summit cams are good. I like the Summit cams. Jay, and if you're looking for cams for a much better price than either one of those, I have cams. Have I got cams for you? And t-shirts. And pretty soon, lots of stuff. We're building the store. Gonna have all kinds of crazy stuff. It's crazy. That's crazy talk. Should the aftermarket make port EFI dual plane intakes? Come on. Hey, aftermarket, Edelbrock, Holly, everybody. 94%. It wasn't 94% when I asked if people like puppies. There's always going to be some that don't like that. And on that note, it is time to go. Thank you guys all for showing up. But I will be back tonight. That's right, WFO. Engine plus boost equals happiness.